You really don't know what it's like to be a police officer or a paramedic or a soldier or a firefighter until you've walked in their shoes, seen what they've seen. And the job changes some people. It scars them, it haunts them, and for some the mental toll is just too much. And that was the case for Sergeant Randall MOULDEN, a respected and much-loved policeman who took his life in June. Another serving officer did the same less than 2 weeks later. Sergeant MOULDEN's wife, Janine, wants to talk about her husband today. She doesn't want other families to go through what her family has gone through, and she's trying to save a service called Soldiers and Sirens, a not-for-profit organisation that her family and her husband relied on over the last few years. Janean MOULDEN, good morning and welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us about Randall, what kind of a person he was and what kind of a police officer he was.
He was caring. He just had a very natural approach to policing. He was kind, considerate, compassionate, empathetic, respectful to everyone around him. He was the epitome of an awesome police officer and just a human. He was just a natural human in every way. Everyone who met him, he wasn't just a cop. He was a mate who was approachable. You could talk to him about anything. He
loved his job?
He thrived for his job. He was his calling from the minute he was born. He was a born police officer.
And when you say he was a born police officer, what do you mean by that? What was it that made him so good at what he did?
His passion and his empathy. And his understanding of people, I think. He understood everything and everyone. And his general approach to life in general. He was just a born natural leader. But he just really wanted to make a difference.
You were a real supporter of that too. You could see in him what made him such a great officer, because he was highly respected, loved.
Even by the scallywags in town, it didn't matter what area we went to, what community we went to. They'd do the wrong thing, you charge them, whatever, but they were always willing to go and have a drink with them at the pub.
He was a mate too.
He was a mate. I've seen it. When you're in a pub and you've got the scallywags going, Randall, Randall, and, they just want to buy him a beer and a drink, and they never held it against him.
There was a car accident back in 2014 in Kalgoorlie in which a mother and her 3 children died. Their car had collided with a bus. That seemed to be a bit of a turning point for Randall. Can you tell us about the impact that you think that may have had on him?
Yeah, I know Randall. And whenever he went to a tragedy or a fatality or anything distressing, we had our own little private ritual that, he would come home, I'd put him in the shower, I'd dry him, I'd put him in his pajamas, we'd burn his uniform, I'd put him in bed and I'd lay next to him and make sure he slept. And, that was it. That was the way we always did it. But the Kalgoorlie one was completely different. I'd spoken to him throughout the night. We always did that. He would ring me, let me know how he was, we'd talk. But the Kalgoorlie one, he was just blank the entire night. And I had coppers ring me the next day to tell me how graphic and horrendous it was out there. So when he came home, I was kind of expecting him to just, do the same routine. Okay, well, I'll put you in the shower, blah, 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 blah. No, he was just blank. He was grey. He was grey. And I asked him, what's going on? Don't want to talk about it. Don't want to talk about it, so I just left him. I was distressed because I saw the soul go out of his eyes. And then when he got up that afternoon, I was like, well, are we going to talk about it? Because we'd always talked about it. And he said, no, what's there to talk about? 4 dead kids and a mother. It's not my problem. And I knew.
That wasn't him.
Really bad. He was gone.
What changes did you then notice in him?
He shut down. He shut down towards not so much the family, but he just shut down. He became very withdrawn. I couldn't help him. I just couldn't help him. I remember not long after we had dinner and all the guys were over and we were talking about it, and, I said that I was disappointed that the correct help wasn't provided to them because it was a horrendous scene out there. And one of the guys sitting at the table said, if you need to see a psychiatrist, then you shouldn't be wearing a uniform. And I lost it and just said that. That makes you non-human. And if you're non-human, you should not be wearing a uniform. If you're feeling the pain, that's a good thing because it makes you a caring person and it makes you understanding. But yeah, because of the stigma, a lot of them wouldn't go and get help with it.
Did he then try to get help from the police force?
Not at that stage. It wasn't until I had a breakdown in 2016 on New Year's Eve and I was arrested. It was a messy situation, but I was escorted out of Narrabeen. I wasn't allowed to contact him. I wasn't allowed to have any contact with the kids. And it was very traumatic for me because I didn't understand what had happened. I mean, to this day, I still don't remember doing what I did. I know I did it, but it wasn't until I went to court and we got in the car to drive back to Narrabeen and he just broke down and he just said, if only I'd just stayed with you that night, it wouldn't have happened. He said, and now I realise I need help. So he went to the department and he did get help. Well, he thought he was getting help, but we were under the impression he was seeing a psychologist, but he wasn't. He was just seeing a counsellor. He started that in the January. And then in the August, she said, I can't help you. You need medication. And he just felt like it was just a horrible thing to say, you know. So then he was just sort of left stranded, but we were talking to a mutual friend and he told us about Soldier On, and that was when we reached out to Soldier On. So when he met Danielle, yeah.
And I'm going to bring Danielle Baldock into the conversation because Soldiers and Sirens is the not-for-profit organisation that you founded. And Danielle Baldock, welcome and thank you for being here with Janine this morning. So Soldiers and Sirens then provide... Is Randall still working at this point?
Yes.
He is still working
yes.
and trying to deal with all of this emotional stress.
Yep.
His mental health is declining. What did Soldiers and Sirens offer you and your family in regards to? Was it counselling?
Well, at first with Soldier On, it was just Randall and Danielle. But Danielle was great. Like sometimes she'd let me in and air my concerns with him because, I know Randall. And I knew he wouldn't be completely honest, whereas I'm a little bit more dogmatic and this is what's going on, this is what's going on, and this is what's going on. So Danielle was great, you know, I know it's a private session between them, but she was fantastic from the start, would let me in and I'd be able to tell her, no, this is what's happening, because if I confronted it with Danielle, then she could confront it with Randall because I knew there were just still some aspects that he'd never be honest about.
If I can bring you in at this point, Danielle, and good morning to you. What does Soldiers and Sirens offer first responders?
Yeah, so I was originally the Soldier On psychologist before I left to co-found Soldiers and Sirens. And the difference, I think, is that we wanted to provide that space for first responders because Soldier On is doing a fabulous job with the military, but there was no service for first responders, not independent and external and confidential like that. And just as Janine's been saying, you know, one of the big concerns that officers have is that if they go to their internal support, that it might, you know, limit their career in some way. And that's not a reality. It's more of a perception. So, you know, WA Police Psych, you know, is amazing. They do great work. But it's just that hesitancy from the officers not wanting to go forward. So we wanted to provide this separate space where you could come together and be a community. So it wasn't just about psychology. It was also about peer support and well-being and bringing families in, because camaraderie is the thing that people who've served really value about their service, and we wanted to provide that somewhere else.
And you're a former police officer, so you understand where these people are coming from.
Yeah, that's right. So I served for 6 years in the WA Police as an officer, and then the last 10 I've spent, 15 now, learning trauma treatments and really making sure I understood what uniform members need in their psychology.
And is that really important, that they're actually speaking to somebody who has walked in their shoes?
It's the essential ingredient. It really is. To me, it's just common sense that you can't speak to someone, and again, I'm speaking from my own experience now, you cannot speak to someone who does not have a clue about trauma, because they will never understand what trauma actually looks like. They will never understand it. It's the most essential part of it. speaking to someone who has seen horror and trauma, you can identify with that. And what these guys do doesn't come from a textbook. It comes from here, and experience.
And Janine, you were very much wanting Danielle to be part of this conversation today, because the sad news is that Soldiers and Sirens has had to close its doors this month. What's happened there, Danielle?
So we did have a federal government grant from the Department of Communities for a 2-year startup, which unfortunately ended in the middle of 2021. We were hoping in the time that we could fundraise, that we could apply for other grants, that we could get some funding from somewhere. But unfortunately, with the COVID situation, we just haven't been able to secure any further funding. And so on the 1st of August, we shut our doors.
How do you feel about that, Janine?
Devastated. But I'm devastated because where do I go? Where do I go for help? You know, that's the reality of it, is I'm in the exact same situation Randall was in. You just feel trapped, isolated, alone, because you've not got that person that understands what you've seen. You know, I've not just lost my husband. It's everything else that's going with it, you know. And my families and friends, they think they understand and they think they can help, but they can't. And I've learned that the hard way. I've learned that the really, really hard way.
Was Randall aware, because obviously he was continuing with his counselling through Soldiers and Sirens, was he aware that their funding was being cut? And how did he feel about that? Did he talk to you about that?
He was devastated. He was absolutely devastated. He'd built a rapport with Danielle, and that's half the key. You build a rapport with someone, and then you open up to them, and the thought of going to another one is daunting, but you've got to keep reliving it. Do you get what I mean? It's cruel. It's because when you're seeing a counsellor, you're opening your heart, your mind. You're opening every quintessential part of you to be honest, to deal with it. And that's a hard thing to do. And then to be shut down and know that you've got to go somewhere else and relive all of that, it's cruel.
And up until that point, was Randall doing okay?
He was doing amazing. He really was. He was, every time he saw Danielle, he walked out with a bounce in his step, a smile on his face. You could see him, which is what Randall always did. Even when Danielle kicked his backside for being a lunatic or not doing the right thing, Danielle kicked my backside. And, you know, then we'd always go and have a drink and we'd talk about it, because while Randall was seeing Danielle, I was seeing Dylan. So, you know, and we always made a weekend of it. We made it an adventure, that it wasn't so just about counselling, you know. But he loved it. He loved it. And he had made such a massive change this year. He was so dedicated to his counselling. He really was.
And do you think when that stopped, his decline started again?
Yeah. Because he just felt lost. He felt helpless. He reached other avenues, but he didn't get very far. And he didn't feel comfortable seeing the police doctor or the psychiatrist. He never did. He told me that. It's common sense. You're not going to go and speak to the police psychiatrist or the police doctor, because you know there's no confidentiality, because everything you say goes to health and welfare, and there is a genuine fear out there. I've spoken to many, many police officers, and they all say the same thing. I would not go to the police psychiatrist or the police doctor, not when the commissioner's in the same building. You can't be honest.
You need funding. It's not going to come from the federal government. They've made that very clear, that funding stream has ended. Any luck with the state government in trying to allow Soldiers and Sirens to continue? Because also we should point out that a lot of what you do was free as well.
Yeah, that's right. So we wanted there to be no barriers to entry. So we wanted to be independent, confidential. They know that we've had lived experience of uniformed service, so we understand where they're coming from. We can build that rapport a lot quicker. And And then, of course, that you can ring up and get an appointment straight away within a couple of weeks without lots of, triaging and lots of barriers in the way. And then the final thing was that we really wanted it to be free. WA Police are amazing. They paid for all of the sessions for their officers. We were also, cost recovering from Medicare and DVA in the places that we could, but unfortunately, it wasn't enough to sustain us. Medicare sessions ran out after 10. We had people from allied forces who didn't have Medicare cards. We had people who were so scared, not only of telling their employer, but telling their GP, that we would just provide them free sessions.
It needs to, part of the reason you are here, Janine, is that you are determined to see this service continue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. I can only speak from the heart when I say it. The Soldiers and Sirens was an absolute godsend to both of us. Randall was seeing Danielle. I was seeing Dylan. Before I was seeing Dylan, like I say, Danielle was happy for me to join Randall in a few sessions so that I could air my concerns, but also share the positive changes that he was making. She took the time to explain what EMDR was and how it worked. And just the openness, the absolute openness of it. So
what is your message to the state government who, so far, the police minister has said, look, there are no funds for Soldiers and Sirens? What's your message?
Just give it. It's not that hard. Give it. It's not that hard. All of this, they'll allow mental health funding for this, mental health funding for that, mental health funding for this, mental health funding for that. That needs to stop. Mental health funding in general. You can't allocate money to this and allocate money to that and allocate money to this and all these different compartments or departments. You just need to give to mental health, and then that gets divided to where it is needed. And I'm sorry, but these guys put their lives on the line every single day to keep us safe. They should be their priority. For me, why it needs to continue is paramount. It gives all first responders a place of safety where they aren't scared of the repercussions that so many officers are just too scared to use the department. That's no disrespect to the department. It's how the boys in blue feel. If you don't feel safe, you won't talk openly and honestly. And that's a really hard thing for me to say because I'm fiercely protective of the department. Soldiers and Sirens operate, I'm speaking from my own experience again, they offer a warm, friendly and inviting environment. As soon as you walk in the door, you feel at ease, you feel at home, like you're talking to a friend. You don't feel like you're talking to a counsellor. The warmth they offer, it's non-sterile and it's non-clinical and it's non-confrontational environment. It doesn't feel like you're being counselled, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. Again, speaking from my own experience, I'm a heavily guarded person, but as soon as I walked in, I felt completely comfortable. I'm not very good at taking compliments or putting myself first, but through a lot of the hard work that they've done with me, I've now learnt to accept compliments and change my perspective on things. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the hard work that they've invested in me. Yes, Dylan, I'm talking about you. They're just real people who speak from experience, not from a textbook. That's the key. You can't open up to someone about the horrors of policing or trauma to someone who has never experienced it. It's just common sense. I've spoken to so many officers over 30 years and they've all said the same thing. Soldiers and Sirens makes you feel comfortable and safe. The only way I can describe it is counselling of any kind is like going to a cafe. If you don't like the coffee, you won't go back. It's the same thing. It's all about feeling comfortable and confident with who you're talking to. And if you know that you're talking to someone that has experienced what you've experienced, you're going to be a lot more open.
Yeah.
He has given me a beautiful gift. He's given me a voice of experience, insight, and as traumatic as this experience is to me, I know that he would want me to speak up, speak about my own experience, not just for me, but for anyone suffering. He would want me to be their voice, the voice that can speak of the things they can't. Since Randall did what he did, and Danielle will tell you, I've always prided myself on understanding Randall's pain. The reality is I didn't have a clue. How could I? I do now. I feel his pain. I feel it every second of every day. I've only experienced one trauma. Randall had 30 years of trauma. I understand that need for the pain to stop. I understand it and I feel it. The images, the flashbacks, the constant fear that grips every part of your body, the paranoia, the feeling of complete helplessness, the hypervigilance, the physical pain, the feeling of I get horrendous pains every day in my back from 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. in the morning. Everything changes when you've experienced trauma. You smell, you taste, you sight, your hearing. Randall always said he felt guilty about not being able to help victims. That I wholeheartedly relate to now. It doesn't matter what people say. I feel incredibly guilty. It's part and parcel because I couldn't help him in the way I wanted to. I can't eat, I don't sleep because I'm petrified of night terrors, the distorted images of reality. All I can do now is help. Use this to our advantage to ensure that the correct changes are needed to make sure this never happens again. We can't keep burying our heads in the sand, guys. Change can only happen through open and honest conversation. We owe it to every single serving officer of First Defence and Frontline. And I feel everything that Randall has been through, he's left me with that. I understand it so much because I'm experiencing it. And because the government have cut funding, where do I go for help? Because I'm dealing with exactly what Randall dealt with. Every day I learn a new thing. Why he couldn't eat, why he didn't eat. He didn't eat because he couldn't eat, because the trauma's so bad. I couldn't understand why he was constantly having pains in his back. Because trauma hits you physically, not just emotionally. And the government need to get a grip. These guys put their lives on the line for us every single day. They deserve the respect of whoever they want to seek counselling from.